And the car was right here, like, here's across the street, and the street is here.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order if we can. We'd like to welcome you tonight to our July 2nd Hendersonville Regional Planning Commission meeting. And would like to welcome everybody here. Wish everybody a happy holiday here in the next couple of days. Let's stand and let's have an opening prayer. And Dr. Lee, would you please open us in a prayer?
Gracious Father, for this day we give you thanks, and we also paused tonight to give you thanks for this wonderful country that we're a part of. Thank you, Lord, for creating it and for sustaining it through so many years and so many trials. Father, we thank you for the city of Hendersonville, how it serves the citizens of this city, and we just pray for the leaders of our city, our mayor, and our aldermen. And Lord, I pray tonight for the members of this planning commission as we deliberate on issues concerning our community's future. May we do so in a way that would be pleasing to you. These things we pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. I'd like to note that everybody is present. I think Ms. Stringfellow is actually on her way, so we'll go ahead and make that note. Otherwise, we do have a quorum. She's not going to be here? Okay, so Ms. Stringfellow's not here. We do have a quorum. We move on to public hearings. The first one is a 30-day public comment period for the draft of Hendersonville 5-year amended consolidated plan covering the period from July 1, 2017 to July 30, 2022, and the 2019-2020 annual action plan covering the period from July 2019 to June 2020, begins June 4, 2019, and ends July 8, 2019. This hearing is regarding the Hendersonville 5-year amended consolidated plan covering from July 2017 to July 30, July 1st to June 30, 2022, and the 2019-2020 annual action plan covering the period from July 1, 2019 to June 30, 2020. An additional opportunity for a public hearing will be held on July 8th at 5:30 at City Hall, 101 Maple Drive, and the consolidated plan is a requirement for the City of Hendersonville to receive funds through the Community Development Block Grant Program of the United States Department of Housing, Urban and Development, noting that there is no Nobody signed up for that hearing, so we'll declare that hearing closed. The next hearing is for a request by Hazel Path Mansion, LLC, to amend the Hazel Path Final Master Development Plan to add Event Center to the list of permitted uses of Lot 11 as identified by Sumner County Property Tax Map 164A-C 020.00. We do have well, actually, we've got 2 people signed up tonight, and I asked Mr. Fuquay if you'll come and introduce yourself and please speak.
We're not against the use in general, but we do have several problems with the plan. And I might mention that I spent many hours on this planning commission, and I'm glad I don't have to be down here regularly like you do. But it's my understanding that the parking is on a temporary basis. The parking is a 120-day lease that can be canceled at any time. And we feel like that it should have permanent parking if it's a permanent building. And the other issue that worried us a bit is the plan that has a number of trees on it are right on our property line. I mean, they may be 6 inches off of the property line, but they're close enough. I wonder if they're built as on the plan, whether they'd even have room to plant the tree. And, that if it's a bush, we wouldn't worry about it, but a tree is a little different thing, and they get big. And being right on the property line is basically a problem. As a former owner of the land, parking was always a problem there. We never had as much as we needed at the time, and adding an event center is going to be a challenge, but that's not our business. Our only business concern is that, they have parking enough that it doesn't pose us any problem, and if they don't plant their trees right on our property line.
Thank you, Mr. Fuqua, and thank you for all your service over the years to our great city. Next speaker will be Jim Thompson. Mr. Thompson.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Thompson. I'm with Centric Architecture, and I'm here representing my business partner, Justin Lowe, who is with his family in Florida at Disney World. I think I got the better deal. Really, I know very little about this project, but I was asked to come before you and answer any questions you all might have about it from a preservation or restoration or National Register property, the impact that it may create by adding this addition. I can tell you that I'm an architect who's worked 39 years doing preservation work in Nashville and around the state. I'm on the Murfreesboro Historic Zoning Commission. I've been on that for probably 8 to 10 years. I'm on the State Review Board for National Register nominations for properties such as this that are eligible to get on there, but we also remove them when there have been enough changes done over the years. Either they've been torn down or burned or been so heavily modified that they no longer are eligible to be on the register. So I'm really here to answer any questions you may have about the design. I don't know that much about the location or anything. I have a set of drawings here that I think have been presented to you all as well. But I'm just here to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Thompson, we'll take this up at the right time here in a few moments.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, but this is a public hearing, but we do appreciate your comments. Thank you so much. That's and there was one more on here, and the name's crossed out, so I'm going to declare that this hearing is closed as well. Moving on to item number 3 on the agenda, is there any request for information and assistance? Hearing none. Any additions to the agenda? Hearing none. We have a motion on the minutes for June 4th, 2019. Moved by Mr. Millsaps. Do we have a second? By Mr. Lee. Do we have any discussion on the minutes? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And any abstentions for? Okay. All right, then on the consent agenda, there is none. Site plans, we have Caliber Collision, and I believe Mr. Witten is handling this. Mr. Witten.
Thank you. This is located at the intersection of New Shackle, Allen Road, and Volunteer Drive. The use is a major motor vehicle service and repair. It is a zoned commercial, general commercial. The staff report outlines basically 3 issues that the building has in regard to the city's building design review standards. Those are, first, the overhead doors. They have overhead doors facing Volunteer Drive, and per our ordinance, that is not permitted to have overhead doors facing a public street. Second, there were issues with the glazing. Our ordinance requires any side of a commercial building facing a street to have 70% of its linear footage as glazing. And then third, the primary material on each of the facades was EIFS, and per our ordinance, that really should be, the primary material should be brick or stone, with EIFS being approved as a lesser material on a case-by-case basis. Since that staff report was written, the developer, Ulrich McDonald, has worked diligently with staff to address as many of those issues as possible. So up on the screen, there should be the latest. There should be a slide up there that shows the latest, set of elevations. Right, that one right there. That's the latest elevation that was done today, and I'll go through the items that they changed. These are changes from what you see in the staff report. First, the overhead doors facing Volunteer, as well as the overhead doors on the opposite side of the building, have been changed to a glazed sectional overhead door, which is similar to what you might see in a commercial area. You might have a restaurant or a bar or something that might have an overhead door that's fully glazed. And they have made that change. You can see the top parts of those glazed overhead doors kind of peeking out above the fence there. Second, they have provided angled canopies above those overhead doors, again on both sides of the building, which helps with the building articulation. Third, they have changed, on the Volunteer side, they have changed the ephes to brick. So on the Volunteer side of the building, that side will be 100% brick or stone, and then the side facing New Shackle will also be 100% brick or stone. Well, actually, I'm leaving out, the cornice at the top is ephes, but that's a very marginal amount. The cornice is ephes, but again, the street-facing facades will be brick and stone. That still leaves the east side facing the animal shelter at 73% ephes, and then the south side at 55% ephes. But overall, it's a very significant improvement over what they initially submitted.
What a building is that has the ephes?
I'm sorry?
One of the already existing buildings.
Can you hold 1 second? Run your questions to
Yeah.
Mr. Whitman, continue.
Okay. Just the last item, or actually I guess two more. They changed the fence type from the one that you see in your staff report to one that it's got stone columns with metal pickets, sort of a wrought iron look in between those stone columns. They don't have the masonry base that is in your staff report, but they have agreed to add evergreen landscaping between those columns to help screen some of that view into that rear area. And then they upgraded the cornice at the top of the building to a more substantial profile to match what they had on the front. So those are the kind of the main things that they have changed since the staff report. So planning staff comments, one, they are objecting to that. That says overhead doors may not face Volunteer Drive. They're requesting a waiver for that. And then staff comment number 5, which says limit the use of ephes on this building to 25% or less on any side. They're requesting approval per this latest amendment. Again, 100% brick and stone on the street-facing facades, and then the ephes, as was previously shown, on the south side and the east side. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Is the applicant here? Somebody from the applicant? Why don't you step up to the microphone if you would, introduce yourself and give you a chance to speak, and then I know that some of our planning commissioners had some questions. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is David Bailey. I represent the developer. With me is Philip Neal, Kimley Horn, our engineer, and Brett Flory as our architect. We appreciate the opportunity to present Caliber Collision. Caliber Collision has a reputation of creating sustainable jobs for our community. They have a reputation of providing high-quality work, and they're an insurance preferred company. This is a challenging piece of real estate that we're working with here. It's adequate for Caliber Collision's use, but there are a lot of challenges. We feel good about how we believe we've overcome that. I'll let our architect and engineer speak a little bit more about our agreements with staff and how we overcame those, but we'll be happy to answer any questions that you've got.
Okay, we could go ahead and hear from the architect as well, specifically about the request for the waiver on the overhead doors. I think Mr. Whitten has given us a very good overview of some of the improvements that have been made. But Can you just kind of give us your reasoning of why you would like the waiver?
Well, my name is Brett Flory. I've done most of the caliber collisions across the country for the past 7 years. Done probably close to 200 of these, and both renovations and new buildings. And Caliber likes to go in neighborhood areas because that's where all the customers are. But sometimes we run into some situations where no one wants to see overhead doors facing the street. And so what we've done here to try to kind of alleviate that concern is we've added brick. You know, that side of the building is 100% masonry, stone and brick, and we have changed the overhead doors to have 4 out of the 5 sections are fully glazed, so it looks kind of like a typical aluminum storefront door you'd see in a restaurant or a retail setting. We've added canopies over the overhead doors to provide additional articulation and character kind of to the building. And we actually added canopies over all the openings on the building doors, man doors, windows, and overhead doors. And we have a decorative fence that'll have more landscaping than what you see on there in front of it. So that's how we've addressed it. Caliber, this prototype, you know, the way this prototype works, the cars pull into the service bay and they pull out. And so with this prototype, they have overhead doors on both sides.
Ms. Longmire, I know I have a question in a minute, but just before she asks, the question that I have, first of all, I like the changes you've made. I think that they're substantial, and especially I like the glazing look on the overhead doors.
Thank you.
But here's my question. Those doors during the daytime, now I know they're going to be open and closed, but is it the normal procedure during business hours to leave those doors open, or are they closed?
Those doors are closed during business hours.
So it's a
because-
climate-controlled building?
Yeah, this shop has air conditioning, and so they close all the doors during the day, and they do all the work inside the building.
So I figured that, but, so as a passerby comes by, the fence is going to be there, but they might see a door open when they're bringing a car in and out.
That's correct.
Otherwise, it's closed.
That is correct.
Okay, Ms. Longmire, I know you had a question.
I like, not what I've said to our planning director is different than what I want to say now. How high is that fence?
That fence is 6 feet. It's shown at 6 feet.
And what's the material of the fence?
The fence is going to be stone columns about every 25 or 30 feet, and steel or aluminum black picket, decorative picket fence. It looks like wrought iron, but it's not wrought iron. But it's a decorative fence.
Mm-hmm.
We use this fence a lot. It looks good, and with the landscaping, enhanced landscaping, it'll provide more screening.
Does the fence run the length of the building?
Yes. And just to let you know, Caliber, they don't keep total cars at their facility. You know, if a car comes in and the insurance company inspects it within 24 hours, and if it's total, they just load it up and get it out of there right then. They don't want total cars. So most of the time, cars that come here aren't you know, they've already determined, the insurance company's already determined if it can be fixed. And so there's not going to be wrecked cars sitting out in the parking lot. Most of the cars sitting out in the parking lot will either be, or you know, they might have a little damage to them, but most of the cars that come in, the customers drive them in with an appointment through the insurance company in Caliber, and they have them come in when the parts are available, so the cars don't sit around. And they move cars through very efficiently.
Anything else, Ms. Longmire?
No, not.
Thank you. Let me just ask one more question on the, let's go to comment number 5. And Mr. Whitten, review for us one more time the percentages of what they're requesting with the addendums here and the revisions on the EFS requirements versus what they're proposing.
Sure. So per the latest elevations, again, both of the sides of the building that face New Shackle and Volunteer will have 100% brick and stone.
Okay.
The south side will be 53%, I'm sorry, that's on my place here.
55?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, 55%. The south side is 55% EFS, 45% brick and stone. And then the rear of the building, which faces the animal shelter there toward the east, is 73% EFS, 27% brick and stone.
Okay, so overall, if we were going to kind of make an aggregate of the whole building, how far are they off?
Not very far off. I would say I don't know, maybe 15%.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Lee, I'm going to recognize you and then go from there.
Well, it certainly appears that the sides that are the most visible are going to be 100%
That is
brick and
correct.
stone.
Yes.
And my question was, is there a current location for Caliber Collision in Middle Tennessee? Or is this just a new operation?
There are no new build-to-suits in Middle Tennessee.
Yeah.
There are several takeovers. They bought out recently Price's Collision.
Okay,
They bought out recently Abra Auto Body.
Okay.
So any that you've seen that were that
Okay.
are now Caliber.
okay.
This will be the first one.
It's a rather large shop, I know, for something of this nature. Do you know how many
Well-
employees we're going to have?
This is actually their smallest shop, their
Is it?
smallest
Yeah.
prototype. But this will employ around 30 people.
And most of them will be skilled,
Yes, yes.
paint and body,
Yeah,
good.
yes.
Good
Like the
incomes.
painters, it's not uncommon for the painters to make over $100,000, you
Yeah.
know, to tip to $200,000 a year.
Okay, very good. And I just wanted to join our chairman in saying that I think the improvements that you have worked on with our staff, Mr. Witten and others, have taken a project that we would very much like to have in the city, but you've improved the visibility of it considerably. And I want to thank you for that work.
You're welcome.
Okay. Go ahead.
One question for staff and then one question for the architect. For the staff, you guys referenced in the packet that the Cardinal Construction Building across the street is 100% brick. Was he required to do that, or did he just do it because that's what he wanted?
No, he was not. That Cardinal building, they were not required to do 100% brick. I think the ordinance under which that was approved did not have a percentage requirement. It encouraged brick construction, but there was not a hard percentage requirement.
Okay. And then you referenced that the overhead doors, 4 of the 5 panels will be glazing. So that 5th panel, I assume, will be on the bottom. It'll be
That's-
just regular metal.
That is correct. Yeah.
Will it be color coordinated with the building or just a white panel?
Well, it'll be black, just like the frames on the door.
Okay.
Dark bronze aluminum, you know, it'll look like a storefront.
Thank you. Do we have a motion from anybody? I don't see anybody in the queue, so we'll entertain a motion here.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve with the revisions that have been negotiated with staff, and the 2 waivers requested also be granted.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Second, Mr. Altizer. Do we have any more discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 1 no. Mr. Woodcock. It's passed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
The next section is Section 8, related projects. We have
They were good to work with.
we actually have two that are Durham Farms, and Mr. Free, would we be okay to group these, or?
Yes, we could group those.
Okay, so Durham Farms Phase 1, 2, and 4, FDP Villa Additions, and then we also have Durham Farms Phases 1, 2, and 4 Preliminary Plat Revision. We would entertain a motion to group those together.
So moved.
So moved by Ms. McCormick. Any second on that? Second by Ms. Silkwood. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So let's come back to this, related projects. Do we need to, who's handling this, Mr. Fr?
This, Hazel
No, this is Durham Farms. Is there anybody
Durham Farms.
speaking on this one?
We can speak to it, Mr. Green.
Mr. Green?
Yes, sir, thank you. This is the final development plan and preliminary plat for Durham Farms, which is a portion of phases 1, 2, and 4. This is related to the PDP that was approved back in May that was looked at with the estate villas, the cottage units, and the carriage units. This was also one of the agreements that came out of this was the extra per lot fee dedicated to the roundabout at the entrance of Durham Farms that was discussed, and we had several things. We have added the detention ponds that are at the roundabout near the closer to the amenity center as part of this, and we've talked to the developer, and we've reached an agreement on everything that was in our staff comments, and looks ready to go.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. Any questions for Mr. Green, or I see the developers back here? Any questions from the commission? All right, hearing none, we have a motion, and we have a motion to group that's already been approved, so I'd entertain a motion to approve these two related projects. So move. Who moved it? Okay, Mr. Woodcock, second.
Second.
Second by Ms. McCormick. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's passed, so ordered. Now we move on to Hazel Path, Lot 11, and this is an add use for the event center, and Mr. Free are you handling this one?
Yes, I
Okay, go ahead.
pull some of that up. Now, this is to add a use of event center to the approved plan development for Hazel Path, as you can see on the footage. It's where the mansion is, and it's on that particular lot. And then we have a site plan that's after this for an event center to be constructed upon the site. This approval of this addition of an event center is something that the staff has looked at from as far as the use is somewhat of a minor addition of a use. So with it being a minor addition of a use, it can just be approved here or action taken on it, approval or denial here with the Planning Commission. Remember on some things like we've had where we had the Kroger use to add the storage and change some things up where the trampoline park was. That was somewhat more of a significant addition of a use, and then that use, the Planning Commission determined to move that forward to BOMA. This one we don't feel is of that significance as far as the addition of an event center. You can see in your packet there are issues where there's not enough parking on the lot itself where the mansion is located. So therefore, they needed to come up with a creative way to provide parking for the addition of the event center. And the way that the owner is looking to do that is through an agreement with the surrounding properties in order to utilize their parking in looking at using it on weekends and at times when those office uses over there aren't operating. This is something that can be done, but it's sticky in the sense that we really need to make sure that we have a really good agreement on the parking. Typically, a lot of off-site parking might be something where somebody purchases it, and actually it's close to the property, and they've purchased it, and then we're counting that as parking. Also, we can look at maybe like a long-term lease or some type of arrangement. And one of the things, and it's kind of noted here, but it's noted on item number 13 in the staff comments of the site plan, that basically what's got to happen is that the agreement, the use agreement to create the availability of the parking to meet the requirement needs to also be reviewed by our city attorney, and it needs to meet kind of what he feels, is securing that parking for some period of time. There's not necessarily parameters where it says you got to have a 99-year lease or 15-year lease, could be a 5-year lease. There's not specificity in saying exactly what that's got to be, but it definitely needs to be something that we have surety to know that there's parking being provided. Because if there's not, and the agreement that we have now, and we've reviewed it, and the city attorney has reviewed it, and there's several elements in here that need to be strengthened and look at, some of the things with the specific license agreement is that it could be terminated, as the gentleman said, I believe, during the public hearing, it could be terminated in 120 days. So basically what that means is what the agreement we have right now is after the day one that it's executed, the owners of the properties that have the parking could say, hey, we're giving you notice, you got 4 months, and you don't have any more parking. So that's a little bit of an issue that would need to get resolved. Also, it's something where the way this thing is laid out, it's saying that they pay per event. So they're paying $500 per event in order to have the right to do the parking and or to have the use of the parking, and then that's got to be paid within a certain amount of time prior to the event. So there's a lot of moving parts where typically this might be, if I'm securing the rights to use the parking, it may be something where I'm paying an annual fee. Instead of $500, it may be $3,000 or $6,000 or whatever, and I've got the right for that for a year. And, that would be something. So, that's one thing that in staff looking at it, that we're a little concerned about that needs to be eventually resolved. And it is a condition upon this, the approval of the add of the use, and eventually will be on the site plan as well. Those things potentially could be resolved, and if they couldn't be resolved, then even if you approve it tonight, then it wouldn't finalize unless that agreement for that off-site parking could meet the requirements of what we're looking for, and something that would give us security that the parking is provided. The concern about if the parking isn't there, and and we'll talk about the site plan a little bit later, but the building that's being built back there, actually very high quality design and very good job on the architecture of it. It fits well with that historic property, respects it, doesn't compete with it, kind of is subordinate to it, and I think the architect did a great job as far as the look of the facility. And if there could probably be an agreement that would meet the soundness of providing adequate parking for a secured period of time, then that addresses the parking-related issues. If we can't have that, and let's just say we didn't have a real tight agreement, and then we approve this, and then they ended up getting a building permit, they build it, everything goes great for 3 or 4 years, and then all of a sudden, these folks that they have the agreement with just kind of pull out, then we're going to have a building that actually that use, or really hardly any use, that couldn't occur on that property because they don't have the parking to support it. And then that would put the planning department and the commission in a position where then we've got to tell the owner of the property they spent all this money building this beautiful building and a really cool event center that you can't use it. And then also they may say, well, we want to use it for a different use. Well, you can't use it for that use either because you don't have parking. So it's kind of a dilemma where, as we're looking at this use, we got to think about the site plan that we're going to talk about as well. And really, this parking seems to be a significant issue. I think, though, as you're looking at it, it would be something where it could be deferred, but deferring it to get an agreement would be equivalent to either approving it or denying it, or approving it with the conditions that they meet that requirement, and if they can't meet it, then, it doesn't move forward and doesn't get constructed. But it's a situation where I think the use that they're wanting to do and the place that they're wanting to do it certainly is creative and maybe fits a need, and then certainly the flexibility of looking to allow the use of parking where two places aren't using the same parking at the same time. That's actually pretty good planning on looking at that, but it's got to be tightened up so we make sure that parking is there and that it just doesn't fall apart after a period of time.
Okay.
And then we just have a building sitting there that, is just an issue. And to be honest with you, then becomes an issue for the city where we're having to stay on top of it, like, oh, well, it got used this weekend, and then, and then it's getting used again, but it wasn't supposed to be used anymore because we didn't have the parking.
Okay.
I hope that kind of gives an overview and of kind of the dilemma of what we're looking at.
Thank you, Mr. Free. Is the applicant here? Is somebody from the applicant here? Would you please just introduce yourself? And I guess I've got a couple questions. Oh, hey, Marty, good to see you. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, Wayne Holloway.
Okay, Mr. Holloway, glad to have you here.
Thank you, likewise.
You're representing them, Mr. Cook?
Yes, I'm Marty Cook. I represent Mr. Holloway's company, Hazel Path Mansion LLC, which owns it. And
Okay.
we have been working on that parking solution. We've worked very well with Kelly McDaniel to secure that neighboring parking at alternative times. I talked to Mr. Bradley before the meeting, and he had the same concerns that Mr. Free
But
expressed.
can you give us, as a commission, I mean, there's, Mr. Free's right, there's no point in us doing an add-on use here, even if it's a minor change, if we don't have specificity on what that parking agreement looks like. So I know you're probably not at that stage yet, but is it going to be an annual, I guess my question is how do we have before we pass this use, how do we have the assurance that the proper agreement's going to be worked out? And where I see the city attorney here, but, and what's been mentioned here is per event, obviously, and then a per annum kind of fee. What are the parties leaning towards here to give us a little bit more specificity before we do an add-on use here?
Well, the one we have in place is 5 years with a 3-year option. What had been discussed was the per event pricing. All I can say is if you all wanted to make it a condition, then we're certainly happy to work with city attorney and with Mr. McDaniel and with Mr. Holloway to form an agreement that makes everyone comfortable, that is tighter. I mean, we had proposed that. We had worked well with him. We thought that,
Sure.
Like Mr. Free said, there's no real requirement, so it's hard for us to know what would be good enough, what's not good enough, so we came in with the 5 years with the 3-year option, but
Well, the only requirement that I would see is that if this building were not located on this addition, this piece of property, there would be a requirement of parking spaces adequate to cover that would be covered with the add-on use for the length of the duration that the building's there. In this particular case, is it really, if we add on this use and there is something constructed there, and by the way, it's a beautiful building, I think it would be really good, but this parking issue, as Mr. Free has said, it brings up a dilemma on how far this lease goes, and I don't know, I guess what I'm saying is the specificity of, is this going to be a 5-year, like you said, a 5-year agreement, which I think it obviously needs to be longer It needs to have some length to it, and I see the city attorney nodding his head here. I don't know if, but, I mean, how do we work through this to know that if we do this, that there's going to be a long enough period of time on the agreement that makes sense for us to go ahead and grant the add-on use? Because once it's granted, for us to go back and revoke that, and once the building is built, you know what I'm saying? So where are we at on the length of time? That's all I'm asking. I mean, where can we go how far can we go?
Well, I don't know that we know that at this time. All I can say is if you all want to put a condition on it, that we end up with an agreement that Mr. Bradley's happy with and that Mr. McDaniel and Mr. Holloway are happy with, then I think that's workable, and I think that we can certainly negotiate that and get it to a point. And there may be something that John's a lot smarter than I am, but that we can come up with that's tighter than a lease. I don't know. I mean, obviously, we don't want to tie up Mr. McDaniel's property because it could affect his property rights, but, I mean, there may be something, some type of use that's a little more permanent, that's a little tighter even than a lease that John and I could work through and
Okay.
make everyone more comfortable.
Well, I'm comfortable with letting staff and city attorney come up with a time frame, but I thought for the commission's sake, it would be really good if we knew that term, I see Mr. Bradley back there and Mr. Free, that was commensurate with any other development that we would do. And could be 90 years. I don't know if that's doable or not. We need something that's binding, I believe, for a number of years, as long as that business is in operation. So is that, I know, Mr. Cook, that's what we're going for, but we're not prepared to offer any kind of long-term lease or what that number looks like at this point, because it's really not been negotiated yet.
Not yet, no.
Well, I mean, as you can see, I mean, the teardrop area there in the front is rather large enough to get the amount of parking spaces in. So, I mean, if ever push came to shove, if the city allowed, I could pave that, but, I mean, that's gonna be a lot, and I can pave it in 120 days. If they said, hey, I'm gonna revoke this lease, I could pave it in 120 days, but again, you pull up to a 150-year-old mansion, you don't really wanna look at a parking lot.
Parking, because it's not
But
really.
I could do that.
And there are some other options of adjacent land that perhaps could be negotiated for parking as well, but none of that's really gotten anywhere. Right now, our most creative option and what seemed like is the best solution right now is, using the off-hour parking of the adjacent business, since there won't be cars there at the same time that there'll be cars at the event center. So I think, again, we could come up with something that's satisfactory and that makes everybody comfortable.
Mr. Lee.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure a point was made about the historical registry and the integrity of us maintaining that. Do I understand that this development will not put that in jeopardy, correct?
I've been on the State Review Board for probably 8+ years, and we only delist on major impact to the buildings, and this would not be considered that.
Okay.
If it's torn down, if it's burned, we removed one car showroom in Chattanooga because they built a huge addition behind it and it dwarfed it.
Right.
And we took it off. But we rarely we're in the business of promoting preservation.
Right.
And so we rarely delist it. I do not think this would impact at all its listing in the National Register.
Okay.
Would have no influence.
Right. Okay. And even though this, the parking certainly is an issue that we need to work through, and I know we're talking about several possible alternatives. I mean, off-site parking could also be an alternative that could be pursued. But I would think the greatest risk of this approval would be to the developer, and the possibility of the developer having a piece of property that he couldn't hold events because he didn't have the didn't have the parking for it. So I think there would be a tremendous incentive on the part of the developer to secure this long-standing parking arrangement for him to be able to do that. But
And I would
My
note,
question was on the historical.
and I would note, Mr. Lee, that there was a comment in the staff report recommending 15 years as a starting point. So if we do this and add the add-on use, and I don't know if our city attorney, would you want to speak to this at all? Is there anything this commission needs to know from your office?
Only if you want me to speak.
I think
If you've got a
that,
question for me, I'd be happy to answer.
well, I know I keep belaboring it, but this is we're adding a use, and we're declaring it a minor use, and I think it's proper to do that. But if we were doing anything else with a minor use, we would also stipulate that the parking be settled. So, and I'm perfectly okay with Mr. Cook and y'all working this out. I don't want to belabor that, but I do believe that, the 15 years, if the city attorney, you think that's a good starting point, or this,
Having been to enough of these meetings to know that you want somebody that's speaking to be up here, I'm coming up here just to say that I wish that you would give us, I think it would be good if you gave staff some guidance to what the planning commission thinks is a reasonable period of time for the long-term parking. It's obviously the concern that we have a building built here, that you can't use the use for which it was approved because of the parking when you don't own the adjacent land. So any guidance the planning commission can give as guidelines for us to go by, Mr. Cook and I will work to meet those guidelines.
okay. Thank you, Mr. Free.
Yeah, one thing in reviewing the agreement that I think also, when you're looking at that, looking over that agreement, is really maybe making sure to lock down when are those specific times that parking will be used. Because it says weekends, which that's good, but then, and it's got it in the whereas, but it's not in the actual terms of the thing. It's listed in the whereas, but not in those numbered elements. And then it's referring to things like, events or commercial events and things like that. I think really making sure to nail down that this parking could only be utilized during times when the offices are not in use, and maybe be specific, and it could be holidays and weekends and after hours maybe, but I think it needs to be very specific, and then that'll give us confidence to know, okay, well, we have a good agreement that is very specific and there's not overlap, and just have that clarity. And then one other thing is that if we approve the addition of the use, I think let's be specific that use is specific to this building. It's not necessarily to the mansion. I believe, unless there's a reason to include the mansion in that.
No,
Okay.
the mansion's just office space now.
Okay.
It wouldn't even be
Because if not, then
functional for that.
my concern with that would be that, well, the parking's got to be resolved. But if we did that and then this didn't get done, now we've approved the mansion as an event center. I know it's been used kind of like that, just as a secondary use, but not as a primary use. So,
Mr. Woodcock?
Thank you. First, I want to say I want this project to go through. I'm excited about it, but I am scared of the parking situation. And even if we do a 15 or 20-year length, if they can still cancel in 120 days, it doesn't fix the problem. So it can be a 50-year lease, but if they can still cancel in 120 days, it doesn't matter.
Well, I
So-
think that's a term that we'll have to.
Yeah, and the only person who can decide that's not here to shake his head, I'm okay with that. So I'm having to assume that's going to be a no just from a safety standpoint. So I would be hesitant to just say, yes, let's approve it and hope they work it out with the person who controls all the power not in the room for me to get any indication of how he feels or they feel. So that's just where I stand as one member of the commission. Thanks.
Mr. Woodcock, would you have any ideas on time length and stipulations of our city attorney, since you brought the question up about that? Do you have any ideas on what we could do on stipulations?
No, because if I owned the parking lot, I wouldn't sign a long-term lease without having a way to get out of it. So I see it as a hurdle that cannot be overcome. So that's why I'm very hesitant to agree to it, because if I owned that parking lot,
I would not sign a long-term lease without having the ability to get out of it, and I don't see a way around that. So again, we can say, well, we'll do a 20-year lease or 50-year lease, but if it still has that termination clause, it doesn't mean anything.
Okay. Any other comments? Ms. Longmire?
Yes, Keith, if you have a 4,000 square foot building that's being used for an event or something similar, is there a requirement in the city that there be X number of parking spaces for this building? And is there, how many spaces are in the Wren Building parking lot? And I know it has a back as well as the front, but I personally don't see that if you had a big wedding there, I don't see that there's enough parking there. You're going to have street parking. They're going to pull in other buildings there that they don't have permission to do because the people won't know that they can't park here, and it takes a lot of policing.
Okay, Mr. Lee?
No, I didn't.
You're going to,
No, I'm.
okay. Mr. Free?
Yeah, the requirement for an event center is one parking space for every 4 chairs. And this one, maybe Sydney can address that on that.
Sure, certainly. So this one is proposing a max capacity of 250 people, which would require, in addition to the employee parking that's required as well. So this one would require 67 spaces. So between this and the shared parking agreement, there's about 77 total that they would have access to. So the parking would meet the current city requirements.
Ms. Silkwood?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really like this idea. I think that this is very much needed in Hendersonville, and I really hope that this project ends up going through. But I do have a concern, and maybe someone can answer this question for me. You do have a neighborhood right behind the event center, so my concern is the noise level. Maybe someone can speak to the noise ordinance in Hendersonville, or maybe the developer could tell me what time these wedding events and reception would wrap up. As far as I can tell, looking at the plan, it looks like, it's possible you could have part of an event, a wedding reception, outside as well as inside, which I think would be beautiful. But again, I do have that concern about the neighborhood behind there. Thanks.
They might appreciate this versus the football games they've put up with for 40 years. I don't know. Right.
Yeah, I mean, we're very respectful of our tenants behind us, and I mean, whatever the city tells me that I've got to stop a noise ordinance like anybody else, we would certainly adhere to that and shut it down, and I would make sure of that. I do want to point out that there is about a 7.5, 8 foot brick wall right there that's going to block most, if any, well, not if any, but most of the noise, in my opinion, from going into that neighborhood. And of course, we would certainly be respectful, because not only do I have to have an event center there, but I work in that office building 6 days a week, and I would rather not have somebody upset 9 feet behind my office. So we'd be very conscientious of that.
Mr. Altizer?
Going back to the parking situation, if you could not secure the long-term lease from your adjoining neighbors there with their parking lots, you mentioned the big teardrop out front you own. Can you get 67 spaces in there as a contingency?
Yes, sir.
So long-term, you have a contingency to build this building, keep the building going, and parking would be met. May not be the prettiest situation, but you could get it done.
Yes, I have 2 options, yes.
Ms. Silkwood?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I never actually got an answer to my question about the noise ordinance or an end time on events. And, to a certain extent, I agree with your comment about the brick wall, but also that's a great way for noise to bounce off the Hazel Path building, off the brick wall, and into that subdivision. So, I think we really need to get a firm answer to this noise question.
I think the city will provide that answer for me.
Since we have the city attorney here.
City attorney's here, we'll let him answer.
We talked about a lot of things today, Ms. Silkwood, but not about noise, so that's a good question. We've got a noise ordinance that requires people to, not disturb the peace at night. And, but we've also had lots of projects that were approved with time limitations as a condition. Whether it's 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, or whatever. I know that limitation was put on a restaurant a few years ago because it was close to a residential area. So it's really hard to regulate exactly what's going to happen on noise complaint. Our noise ordinance talks about decibel levels. You've got to have somebody come out with something that can measure the decibel levels, and hopefully by the time all that happened, the event would be over. But, but it can be a concern. I know that when we have someone that wants to use a loudspeaker system, the way that's set up, if there is a complaint, they have to shut it down. So I don't know if they intend to use loudspeakers for the outside for dancing or whatever they're doing after a wedding. I don't know what they have in mind for that, but we do have some protections with respect to that, I know also, that's in the city ordinance. So there are some things in place, but this board, this commission ultimately decides if you want to. I assume, Mr. Free, they can put some conditions on this if they chose to.
Yes, you could do it. This is a plan development, so we're adding a use to a plan development, so it's kind of flexible. And so we could add the use, and you could put some limitations on noise-related issues past a certain period of time, and those would be, they would still have to fall within the city ordinances on noise, but it would also give us the opportunity if they did not abide by what our conditions were, then we could take action from the planning staff and cite them for violations of that. So that could be done. So that'd be reasonable to do.
Thank you. Ms. Silkwood, anything else?
I guess another question would be, does that need to be done today?
Yeah.
Now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it would need to be done, if this was approved, you've got, that everything needs to be worked out with the conditions to get an agreement that would pass muster with our city attorney, and any other specific timeframes, that minimums that you had, whether it's 10, 15, whatever years, that. And then if you want to put some limitations on noise or limit past a certain amount of time, past midnight or 11:30 or whatever it was, it could be done. If you remember, most of you remember, we had the Taco Bell, and actually,
We actually did that.
that use got added, and we actually limited the hours of operation for the Taco Bell. So it's possible to do that. Yes.
Okay, Okay, Mr. Lee's first, and then you can be next.
Yeah, just as a part of discussion, I think there is general agreement, just from our discussion, that we would love to see this project go forward. I personally would love to see this project go forward. But I think some very real issues have been raised in terms of parking, in terms of the noise level and the limits that we might want for outside activities as well as events inside, and hours of operation even for this as well, that would coincide with what the other businesses around in the area would do. So would it perhaps be the best path to delay action on this, to allow the developer and the planning department and the city attorney and the other businesses and Mr. Holloway, who I think wants to do a very quality project and job, to give them a few more weeks until our next meeting to be able to work these things out? I hate to just arbitrarily say, okay, nothing past this hour, when maybe one additional hour would be crucial to the success of the things that you're wanting to do. So would there be, I'm raising the question.
Mr. Lee, I think that's a very viable option, and let me tell you why. Because really the only option we would have would be either to approve or deny this. And I would much rather not deny it and have everything worked out with everything that you've said. The applicant could withdraw this, or we could just put a motion to defer until the next meeting. I don't know how long you guys need to work out the agreements with the owners over there and all that. But, and then the other part is just for safety's sake, one other thing that Mr. Lee, the option of putting parking on the keyhole there, that's what I'm calling it, that we would have some definitive engineering that would say that how many spots we can actually put in that place, and that's a math question. So I trust you. I mean, you're saying 60-something could go there more.
Sure, yes, sir.
Yep. So
Yeah, but I've been planning this for quite a long time.
Quite a long time.
I'm getting ready to sink a large sum of money into
Sure.
this project, so I assure you that all of these concerns that you've brought up tonight have not gone without notice to me. I mean, the parking, I have two, ideally for me, long-term, because I can withdraw in 120 days. I mean, I have two long-term fixes to the parking situation, one being a non-aesthetically pleasing, a secondary being an adjoining property that a gentleman may have spoke against as leverage to me to overpay. I'm working through those currently. But also, as far as the noise ordinance goes, I mean, it's a wedding. Most people get married at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Most people are going to drink a couple of cocktails and get out of there. I don't need until 11:30 at night. I mean, if I could get 10:30 or 11 o'clock, which I think is very reasonable, given that people swing from the rafters at Rio Bravo until 12:30 at night, I think that's
Sure.
quite reasonable.
Well, let me ask this. I mean, would it be okay, like I said, if the applicant would agree to a deferral, to
What-
work out these issues?
When's the next meeting?
It's August. I like, see, here, first of all, for us to approve the site plan, the use has to be done first, and we'd have to agree to that. And then the site plan also would have to, just for good planning, would have to have the parking included on the site plan as well. So with these issues that you're raising and that we can have solved, I think the general consensus of the commission is that we like the project. And so if we could get another 30 days before this commission meets and come back next time, it might be more advantageous than for us to split the vote here and possibly not get the add-on use, which would make the reason to do a site plan discussion mute.
Sure.
That reasonable?
Yeah. I mean, the lady that wants to get married in there sitting right there may disagree with us, but, yeah, I mean. it's
Never
only
want to mess up
it's
a
only
lady that's
18
getting
months.
married.
What's another 2 weeks, right? I mean,
I've done that too many, I've pastored too many years. I know you don't ever want to do that.
You're not angry bragging yet.
I don't think we do. Yeah, I guess. The short's not time, yeah.
Okay.
Would you agree to deferral? Okay, then we're going to do that. We're going to deferral on that, and we'll come back to the planning commission next time around.
All right.
Yeah, and the site plan as well.
Thank you all.
All right.
Thanks.
Good discussion, commissioners, very good. Staff reviewed projects that are approved. There's a whole long list there. If you're okay with it, I'm not going to read every one of them. Staff reviewed projects pending. We've got Forest Acres Section 2, Hendersonville Landscape Center Shed Addition, Indian Lake Village, Phase 8, Michael Archibald Property, Saundersville Industrial Park Section 8, lots 40 and 41, consolidation. We have one item under Other, which is a resolution, 2019-03. It's a resolution recommending acceptance of the dedication of the completed streets in Fountain Brook, Phase 1, Section 2, Hendersonville, Sumner County, Tennessee. Got that resolution in front of you. Do we have a motion to accept?
So moved.
So moved by Ms. McCormick. Second? Second by Ms. Silkwood. All in favor, say aye. Longmire, I'm sorry to hear you. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Okay. Planning Director comments?
I'll just make,
Oh, hold on, turn your mic on.
I'll just make one brief comment on the caliber collision on that building. I just want to commend the architect and the owners of Caliber Collision. Where they went from what they initially submitted, they really stepped up to the Hendersonville expectation. And this is a good example of that, what we looked at tonight. And so I really appreciate the effort that they put into meeting the staff's expectation on that property. Thank you.
All right, do we have a motion, Mr. Millsap?
Mr. Chairman, move we stand in adjournment to call the chair.
Have a motion, do we have a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.